For decades, horror entertainment has manifested in several forms, with the gaming and movie fields being the most popular and common. But in order for each game or movie to stand out, creators were pushed to be more innovative in showcasing what fear actually means and how it feels to be really scared of something. Some developers saw that the environment was key to achieving this, and they worked hard to create settings that can terrify us even by just walking through them. Whether it's a creepy haunted house with a dark past, an abandoned hospital with a horrible background, or infamous woods with hidden mysteries, they always try to convince you that the place you're in is not welcoming nor peaceful. On the other side, other creators saw adding disturbing entities to the game as the best way to unsettle the player, especially when these entities look casual at first sight. This can include the ghost of a wife who died in agony and despair, a doll you thought was a symbol of childhood and joy, or simply a monster who was once a loved one. However, there are very special types of developers who quietly get the job done much more effectively and cleverly. All of it by using nothing but your mind itself, which also means the mind of the protagonist. These developers believe that your inner demons are your biggest fears, and the thing that scares you the most can be in your mind all along and not anywhere else. In order for these ideas to be executed properly and realistically, developers rely on a sensitive yet very dangerous element, which is mental illness. Certain mental health conditions like anxiety disorders, phobias, and PTSD can be seen by many of us as regular issues that people deal with and move on from. But for the individuals who go through them, it's actually a horror that you'll never wish to experience. In this video, we're going to talk about few horror games that perfectly delved into the topic of mental illness in a smart, genuine way, not just to exploit it for cheap scares. Horror games that made us question what's real and what's not, who's evil and who's not, and most importantly, how you're seeing this and why. So, without further ado, let's start.
My name is Simon. I'm just an average guy. Nothing special about me. Like someone you don't notice. Someone nobody cares about. Someone left outside.
Cry Fear is one of the most special and unforgettable games you could ever play if you love to see what psychological horror actually feels like. At first sight, it looks simple, casual, and familiar, but as you go deeper and explore the story, you find out how disturbing and sad it is. The game follows Simon, a young man struggling with depression and social anxiety as he wanders the streets of Stockholm. Even though he's already miserable enough, Simon soon finds himself stuck in the city as it becomes more nightmarish and bizarre, filled with horrifying creatures and demons that he must fight to survive. However, he also meets casual characters, like a mysterious doctor who looks friendly at first, but he eventually turns out to be a ruthless murderer with an evil background. He also meets a girl called Sophie, and she's actually his old friend from college because he used to defend her against bullies. Simon has hidden romantic feelings for Sophie, and she's actually his secret crush. But the problem is, Sophie doesn't share these feelings with him. Eventually, when they sit for a conversation on the rooftop, he confesses to her about his love. But Sophie showcases a combination of negative feelings, including rejection, desperation, and a desire to be alone. She's telling Simon that she wants to get away from everything, but he doesn't understand what she actually means. And in a surprising twist, she ends the conversation by putting an end to her life. Simon sits there, shocked about what happened. But it gets even worse because he has to deal now with a gruesome monster that shows up from nowhere. In the entire game, Simon continues to see stuff that makes no sense, and even when he tries to make a deal with the doctor to help him in the end, the doctor betrays him and shoots him. For some reason, it feels like all the scenarios are designed to be against Simon, and he's helpless no matter how hard he tries. The reason for this is that all the stuff that I explained to you so far has never actually happened. The doctor doesn't exist. Sophie did not die. And there's no real monsters anywhere. In fact, the entire Nightmare City is basically a creation of his mind. This world reveals his distorted thoughts, self-loathing, and feelings of isolation. And in the game, you witness his collapse in mental state firsthand, making it deeply personal and relatable experience for some. Furthermore, the game's monsters and environments are not really random. They are manifestations of Simon's inner demons and fears. For instance, the doctor that we see across the game represents his struggle to seek help and face his issues. In the real world, Simon is having a hard time talking with the doctor, and he feels scared of expressing his mental issues. However, the biggest plot twist here is that Simon, in real life, can't even walk. He was hit by a car, and the perpetrator ran away, resulting in severe injuries that left him crippled and wheelchair-bound. This life-altering event deeply affected Simon's mental state, leading to even more depression and isolation.
Where am I? How did I get here?
The trauma of the accident and its consequences are the primary drivers behind escalating his psychological struggles and the nightmarish world he finds himself stuck in. The feeling of being stuck in the nightmarish realm is basically a manifestation of his sentiments after being stuck in a wheelchair. The death of Sophie is also a manifestation of Simon being scared of her lack of care for his feelings. But things don't stop there, because the game offers multiple endings depending on your actions and choices as a player. 3 of these endings are completely tragic and painful, because in all of them, Simon surrenders to his despair and fear and decides to put an end to them in the saddest way possible. I'm pretty sure you get what I mean without explaining this part further. The other ending is somewhat cheerful in certain aspects because Sophie survives in it, but it also comes with a price. In this ending, the real Simon navigates another horrifying nightmare and faces a manifestation of his own tormented mind in a fierce gun battle. Eventually, he defeats the other side, symbolizing his mind's release from the burden of his past trauma. But it turns out this whole encounter was a result of Simon's psychosis, and he actually shot 2 police officers in real life.
Shot them both. This was not supposed to happen. Doctors testified that I was having a psychosis.
Long story short, the game perfectly gives us a taste of the pain that mentally unstable people go through. It's also allowing us to understand what vivid hallucinations feel like for the person who suffers from them. Vivid hallucinations are real mental conditions that make the person see stuff that feels very real and lifelike, even though it's not actually happening in the real world. It involves seeing things like people, animals, or objects, regardless of whether they are there or not. You can also hear imaginary sounds and even smell bizarre stuff. Vivid hallucinations are a result of mental diseases like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and severe depression. which explains why they're very relevant to Simon. So, A Cry of Fear is definitely one of the few horror games that delves into this realm in a responsible way, which forces you to feel even more sympathy for people with these conditions.
Am I going insane? Shit.
You hear them too, right?
They're watching her. Can you see them? They're going to do that to you.
We picture fear, and we think of a shadow in the woods, creature in the night.
For those who are not familiar with Hellblade, they might believe at first sight that it's an experience about fantasy, action, and adventure. But when you actually play it, you realize it's a psychological horror experience to the core. The game is set in a dark fantasy world inspired by Scandinavian mythology and Celtic culture. It follows Senua, a warrior traumatized by a Viking invasion. She embarks on a creepy quest into the Norse underworld to fight for the soul of her dead lover, Dillian. But throughout her journey, she battles external enemies and also the inner demons inside her mind, manifested as eerie voices and visions. In every part of the walkthrough, Senua experiences hearing and visual hallucinations. Voices always whisper in her ear, offering guidance, doubt, and fear.
I'm so sorry.
Killing you would be too easy. They're taking your memories to torture you. They're taking you from the inside. You're disappearing one memory at a time. Every time you remember, it disappears. They're going to take everything.
These voices represent different aspects of her psyche, shaping an endless internal clash. The game's audio design intensifies this experience, making you feel as if you are hearing these voices inside your own ears. The psychosis of Senua causes her to experience delusions, misunderstand events, and see shadows where there are none. This always makes her paranoid, and she even begins to question her own sanity and the reality of the world around her. However, her condition has a reason, because her mental illness is deeply rooted in the trauma of witnessing her loved ones being brutally murdered by Vikings.
Where am I? I can't see. Who's there?
Can you hear me?
Her journey is basically a way for her to process her grief and face the demons of her past. But despite her struggle, Senua exhibits remarkable strength and resilience. She refuses to give up, even when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. Her journey is a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity, even in the face of mental illness. The game shows us that overcoming the demons in our minds is possible when we have the will to do it. This important message made Hellblade an amazing representation of mental illness in the video game industry, to the extent that even the National Library of Medicine, which is a government institution, made a study about it to dive deep into its profound narrative that goes beyond gaming entertainment.
It's so quiet. So dark.
It's okay. Listen to your own breath. Feel it rise and fall.
Thank you for saving me. But I wish you hadn't. Even Mama said it. I deserved what happened.
No, Angela, that's wrong.
There's no way you didn't expect that Silent Hill 2 would make it to this list. It's basically a masterclass in psychological horror, but also a lesson on how much your mind can be your biggest enemy. At first, the plot seems very simple, but weird at the same time. The protagonist here is James Sunderland. a man who receives a letter inviting him to go to a special place in Silent Hill Town. This looks normal, but the problem is, this letter is from his wife, Mary, who already died 3 years ago because of her health issues. Even though James knows very well that his wife died, he still feels excited about her letter and decides to visit Silent Hill Town to see her there, hoping that she might really be alive. When he arrives in Silent Hill, James finds a town shrouded in fog and a place basically with no sign of life. However, he then meets a mysterious young woman called Angela. She might look cheerful when you see her for the first time, but once you discover her backstory, you understand that she is one of the most tragic characters in gaming history.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
She's 19 years old when you see her, but throughout her earlier years of life, she suffered abuse from her family. She was touched by both her father and brother, and her mother was aware of her suffering, but she refused to intervene. She even tells Angela that she deserves what happens to her. And by the way, I think you know what I mean when I say the word touched. These horrific memories left Angela deeply sad and emotionally damaged, which explains why you always see her desperate and even scared of James because she thinks he might be like her father and brother. James also meets a woman called Maria, who looks exactly like his wife but feels more vibrant and physically appealing to him. James even thought she was his wife in the beginning, but he soon realizes she's a different woman and her existence in the town is very mysterious.
I told you, I'm Maria.
Sorry. I was confused.
Where are you going?
I'm looking for Mary. Have you seen her?
Everywhere in the game, James keeps finding a cast of bizarre characters, each with their own connection to the town and their own twisted inner demons. This includes a ruthless boy who seems very disturbing, and a little reckless girl who keeps causing trouble for James and blaming him for everything. However, the real question is, who are these people? And why James is seeing all of this? Well, similar to Cry of Fear, most of these characters I mentioned don't even exist in real life. Also, this confusing version of Silent Hill Town is only inside James's mind. Because James is seeing all of this not due to trauma or fear. It's basically because of his feelings of guilt, agony, and regret for his own actions. The people and deadly monsters he encounters also represent his hidden shame as well as his desires. For example, Maria represents the version of his wife that he wishes to exist in the real world, while Pyramid Head is a manifestation of his regret over his actions towards his dying wife, Mary. He is the embodiment of James's desire for punishment, and that's why he appears as a relentless executioner who stalks and torments James throughout the game. But you're probably wondering at this point why James feels guilty in the first place. Well, the reason is, James is not really the loving, nice husband you think he is. In fact, he is the exact opposite of that. When his wife Mary got sick and she began relying more and more on his care over time, James started seeing his wife as a burden on his shoulders. He gets angry when she complains about something, and he also hates the fact that she can't fulfill his desires as a wife. Seeing her become weaker and lose her beauty did not make James have sympathy for her. But instead, this made him feel that she's a problem in his life, and he needs to get rid of this problem. He also became an alcoholic as time passed. and his mental state kept getting worse. The tragic part, however, is that he literally decided to put an end to this situation once and for all. Eventually, James killed his wife.
I don't know why, but I just love it here. It's so peaceful. You know what I heard? This whole area used to be a sacred place. I think I can see why. It's too bad we have to leave. Please promise you'll take me again, James?
In a shocking moment, James smothered her with a pillow after years of struggling to care for her during her terminal illness. In his perspective, he tried hard to convince himself that he did it to end her misery and pain. But deep down, he knows very well that he did it because of his selfishness, hatred, and heartless personality. This guilt eventually led him to insanity, and that's why he imagined this entire scenario in his mind, where his wife invites him to Silent Hill Town as if she is still alive and she wants to see him for a romantic date. He desperately tried to convince himself that nothing was wrong and that he hadn't really killed Mary. This self-deception is what makes James one of the most complex and disturbing characters in gaming history. His actions towards his wife reveal a truly chilling ruthlessness, which makes us have a hard time feeling sorry for him.
I was weak. That's why I needed you. Needed someone to punish me for my sins. That's why I did it, honey. I just couldn't watch you suffer.
I wasn't planning to add Vizage to this list because even though it's one of the best psychological horror games you can ever play, the general story here is very similar to that of Silent Hill 2. However, there's a chapter in the game that delves into a mental condition that I personally had a problem with at some point and find very interesting. The plot here is about a man called Dwayne in the 1980s who lives in a house and explores his different vast rooms. But the problem is, this house has a very dark history, and the past residents had a very distressing time inside it. In the first chapter, you'll uncover the story of a young girl named Lucy, who lived with her family in the house in the 1960s. But Lucy had a very troubling incident where she was introduced to a demon through TV and radio. Since then, her whole personality has changed, and she has started suffering severe mental breakdowns and seizures. She even stopped eating food or talking to her mom and dad. Her parents tried every medical solution, but nothing worked. Sadly, her story eventually ends in a very tragic way in the bathroom, and I think you guys know what I mean. The other chapter talks about an elderly couple who lived together in the house, but the wife, Dolores, also had psychological issues and paranoia that made her very suspicious of everyone around her, including her own husband. This led her to believe that her husband is a threat and wants to harm her, which sadly pushed her to kill him. Even though both of these chapters are extremely tragic and scary, the third chapter is what caught my attention the most. In this chapter, we explore the story of Rakan, a man who resided in the house in the 1970s. But unlike Lucy and Dolores, Rakan's issues were not caused by external factors, but rather by his mind itself, because he actually suffers from scopophobia. For those of you who are not familiar with this condition, it's simply the excessive fear of being watched or stared at all the time, even though no one is really watching you.
What the fuck is this? Oh, it better not be what I think it is. Bastards. What is this? Who the fuck are you?
This condition also makes people experience significant anxiety and distress when they see others looking at them casually, because they think they're looking at them in an evil way, or they want to harm them. In the game, we can see Rakan talking to himself and being scared of something around him, even though he lives alone. At some point, the neighbors called the police because they heard him throwing books violently and firing gunshots. The police arrested him and took him to a psychiatric hospital, but he insisted that he was only defending himself because someone broke into his house. However, the police found no evidence of this, and they said it was all in his mind.
Please, stop! No! Please!
The events of the game as a whole get even more disturbing when you start understanding the story of the protagonist. When you start piecing the hints together, you'll find out that Dwayne worked in a water plant before, and he was paid to develop a substance to poison the water. This substance was basically a psychological drug that was intended to be tested on the residents of the houses that drink that water, and one of these houses is the one we're currently in. It is suggested that all the residents I mentioned, Lucy, Dolores, and Rakan, were exposed to this poisoned water, and all of their hallucinations were because of it. Dwayne is seeing all of these scenes because of his feelings of guilt, due to the fact that he played a part in their pain. This section of the story is thought to be inspired by a real event, which is the MK Ultra program by the CIA in the 1960s, when they secretly tried to use many people as test subjects for their mind-controlled drugs and psychological manipulation experiments. And by the way, Dwayne's story also ended in tragedy because he killed his entire family in the end after he went insane. And some say his brain was affected by the same substance. In other words, this game's narrative is very sad from all sides and gives a huge lessons about psychology, greed, family, and regret.
I could help you with that, you know. I'm only with you because you have money. It's probably blood money, but I don't care. I don't care about you. If you want to die, I'll happily oblige.
Anyway, I think this is enough for today because things obviously can't get any more depressing. Even though the atmosphere and the general tale of these games are mostly sad and tragic, keep in mind that there is always a lesson to be learned. The number one lesson here is that you should always take your mental health seriously. You should do the same about other people's mental issues too. We should also learn to never give up and keep fighting the demons inside our minds until we win. Please tell me in the comments if any of these games resonate with you, and also if you know any similar games that should be mentioned in future videos about the same subject. Anyway, give me a like if you loved what you watched, and see you next time.